Let's see what the tool gave us as a result of the optimize. So just to quickly refresh everyone's memory, I hit optimize, run optimization just before the break, which is the big green button at the top of the table on the right-hand side. If you don't see the same table as me, you may have to click the view optimization module button that's in the middle at the top to bring up this table and see it. And this was generated on the results from the table on the left for everything that has a yes beside it. You'll notice if we scroll down, everything was selected with the exception of 1 air change per hour and 0.6 air changes per hour. We're going to leave it that way for the first part of the exercise to make it work a little harder on other upgrades and not rely on air tightness right away. But you'll also notice that right now our table looks like it didn't populate. It says please select filter. So if I scroll over to the right-hand side of the table, Filter Solution By has a drop-down menu which will allow you to select either the capital cost or the net cost to buyer in order to view the results. So let's choose capital cost first. And you'll see it now spits out an optimized solution based on the parameters of our run. So it compares it against the base case, which is the first column, and the second column, the optimal solution, is what it is proposing as the most cost-effective, in this case, to the builder, combination of measures to achieve a net zero ready performance target, which was what we set back at the beginning on the targets tab. So it's got a lower air tightness, 1.5 air changes per hour, upgraded ceiling R value, upgraded wall R value, different window. You can see it's upgraded pretty much across the board. Important to point out here that it doesn't max out a category if it doesn't make financial sense. You'll notice that it stopped at R70 for fiberglass attic, even though there's an R80 option. So it determined in its evaluation that R80 was not giving you enough performance benefit for the additional cost of going there, and so it doesn't always max out the options, to point out. Something that jumps off the page for me is that this solution uses an electric tank hot water tank and electric baseboard heating, which, as somebody working in the Ottawa market, is pretty much a non-starter for most discussions. But keep in mind that what this tool is doing in isolation here is looking at the lowest cost to the builder to build this home. It costs less to put in baseboard heaters than pretty much anything else, but your homeowners aren't really going to like you for that, so you have to take that into consideration. So before we scroll down further, let's just see what changes if we now change the filter solution by selection to net cost to buyer. When we do that, you can see that a lot of the envelope upgrades stayed the same, but now the mechanical systems have changed to prefer a gas solution. In this case, a condensing tankless hot water tank, a drain water heat recovery unit, and a gas furnace as the HVAC system of choice. So this is a preferred option from the homeowner's point of view. It's going to cost less to operate this home with this solution than with the previous solution, even though it's going to cost slightly more to build. If we scroll down to the two tables at the bottom, you can kind of see the other costs that we're going to get out of this. So in the first table, it's giving you the energy breakdown. The annual energy, the middle result, is the amount of energy that the home will consume using this spec. And the first line above that, the PV required, will match this line if we're looking at a net zero or a net zero ready solution. And this is the number that's limited, if you remember back on the first tab, by the 20,000 kilowatt hours of production potential that we specified was available for this home. In this case, it seems to have decided that installing nearly the maximum amount of PV was more cost effective than making further upgrades to the home in order to achieve a net zero balance. So it's looking for that balance when it does this calculation. And it's showing you on the last line of that table the annual energy savings over the base case. So in this case, this home will end up with 15,417 fewer kilowatt hours consumption than the base case that it's being compared against. The final table down below gives you the actual costs to the builder and the buyer that you're interested in looking at. So if you look at line 2, the incremental cost. I think this is probably the most useful one when we're talking about capital cost. The incremental cost is the amount of cost above and beyond the base case that you would have to spend as a builder to build this solution using this costing data. So in this case, for the net cost to buyer solution, we're looking at an upgrade cost to the builder of $15,691 to get to net zero ready. That will include the cost of all of these upgrades, but in this case, because we're only targeting net zero ready, does not include the cost of the panels, which is why the number is fairly aggressive, fairly competitive. You then have an annual utility cost savings in dollars per year compared against the base case, and an incremental annual mortgage increase as a result of paying for a more expensive home. This is taking the capital costs into effect. So with those both taken into consideration, this net zero ready home would cost a buyer $506 per year more to own than the base case. So in this case, what we can take away from that is that the savings on energy do not outweigh the additional cost of the mortgage payments for this particular configuration of options. Let's just switch it back to the capital cost for a moment to look at these lower two tables with that lens as well. When we switch it back to capital cost, you'll see that the incremental cost to build, if I'm looking at the last table, went from $15,000 down to $4,000. So this costs only $4,000 more to a builder to build a net zero ready home above the base case, which is a pretty impressively low number, given the caveat that we're talking about electric resistant spaceport heat, which might not be a good solution from a marketability point of view. The annual utility cost savings is actually a negative number in this case, meaning you're not saving. That's kind of a double negative. You have to keep that into consideration. So this showing that it's actually going to cost the homeowner $884 more a year to run this net zero ready home over the base case because of the cost of electricity and baseboards compared against the base case, which uses gas. So to this configuration, we're looking at an increase to the buyer of $1,200 a year versus the $500 a year that we saw in the first case. So pretty different, a lot based on mechanicals and their related costs in this case. So with this as our starting point, you should all have this sheet of paper in front of you. If anyone doesn't have one, I've got an extra one here. Anyone else not have one? You guys all have one? Okay. So we're going to go through a series of steps together to just make sure that everyone's comfortable with where to find things in the tool. We'll make sure that everyone's getting the same results coming out of these, and then we'll work towards a kind of an independent exercise at the end to give everyone a chance. So the first thing we're going to do, step number one, we're going to try changing some detailed costs just to make sure everyone knows where this is. And this is what we looked at a moment ago. So let's scroll over to our ECM table on the left-hand side. Go to any one of the above grade wall solutions. Let's all do R22 effective just for the sake of consistency, and type yes in the view costing detail column. And after you've done that, click on the big green button to the right of it that says click to view detailed costs. Once it's done thinking, in order to actually see those detailed costs, we'll have to click the button at the top that says view costing module. And that should bring up the table with the breakdown of that wall assembly to the right. Does everyone have that in front of them yet? Okay, so with this table up, we're going to change the drywall price to $20 cents a square foot for the material and 40 cents a square foot for the labor. So if you look up on the screen for a moment, you can see where I'm putting in these costs. You don't actually type over the unit cost, you type in the cost adjustment, which is the field beside it that's blank. So we're going to type 20 cents or 0.2 into the cost adjustment for the material. One at a time. Okay, so after you've entered 20 cents, we're going to click Update Cost at the bottom of the table. And now we'll change the labor cost to 40 cents, and we'll do the same thing. 40 cents, tab out of the cell, and then click Update Costs. And we should have 20 cents and 40 cents now in that table. Great. Okay, so we're not going to generate a cost optimal solution based on those changes because it's not likely a big enough change to impact it, but I just wanted to make everyone familiar with where that is. Everyone good? Okay, so after you've done that, if you can switch back to the optimization module by clicking the top green button to bring back this table. What we're going to do next is we're going to save our 2 runs that are current. So actually, I don't know if the runs were pre-done in the default, but does everyone actually see a solution right now, an optimal solution in their table? Yep. Okay, so we're going to save these to our results tab so we have them for reference later. So to do that, in the field to the right that says enter run name, make sure that you've filtered the solution by capital cost. And we're going to enter the run name as NZR-capital.
You don't need to add capital costs anymore, Mark. So that's been included as a subheader in the copy over.
Okay, excellent. That's news to me. Yes?
Save a solution having not put in the name ahead of time is the way of retroactively doing it?
Yeah, it should save to results tab.
Yeah. So
Just
after you've got a name for it, you can click Save Solution, and that will spit you over to the Results tab. It's entered the name in the field at the top. And then in the second field, this is great. This is actually a new feature since last week. So it's now going to tell you whether the solution that you saved was the capital cost solution or the cost to owner solution. So that's nice. Nice little step. So let's go back to ECM selection tab. We'll switch our filter to cost to own, net cost to buyer. We're going to change our name. In this case, we'll change it just following the exercise just for consistency. So we'll change this to NZR-own, and we'll save the solution again. And you'll see that it saves it to the right of the previous solution, so now you have them side by side for the sake of easy comparison. So as I was saying, it's a little easier to point up here, I find sometimes, but so we've got up top is the name that we gave it for each of those results runs. The second line shows us whether it was the capital cost or the net cost to buyer option that we saved, which is really useful because last week I misnamed one and it saved the opposite and it was really confusing. So that's a nice feature to have. And now we've got all of the specs side by side for easy comparison to see where the differences are, along with the energy consumption numbers and the costs. So we're going to use this saving feature through the next few steps so that we can go back and look at our results and compare them. So the first major change we're going to look at, step 3 on your sheets, we're going to change our target. We're going to change the target from net zero ready to net zero. So we're going to go back to our optimization criteria tab, which is where we set our targets. We're going to change our net zero approach from net zero ready to net zero. So your top table should look like what's up on the screen right now. And now we're going to go back to our ECM selection tab, and we're going to click Run Optimization, the big green button at the top, so that it'll generate a solution now based on PV.
maintaining R22 as the detail.
Yeah, maintaining everything else, just changing the target. Okay, so mine is finished running. Just show, yes,
The task 1
yes.
said the cost of an R40 SIP panel should have dropped to 20,000. Where do I see that?
If we scroll over to the ECM table here, let's check and see if this worked. Under R40 effective on the above grade walls, in your material options, there is a SIP option. Do you see that? If we select that, and it didn't change to 20,000, I'm not sure why that is, but.
It's supposed to be an exercise where we go and actually override the cost, the SIP panel cost.
Oh, you'd like to change that, okay. So let's do that one as well. So with that selected, with our 40 walls, so everyone's on the same page, I guess we want to rerun our optimization after we do this, but if everyone goes to R40 effective, change it to SIP, we'll do a simple cost override for this one. We're just going to type in the cost override $20,000. Thanks, Lucas. Bear with me, I got these exercises this morning, so we're on through them for the first time together. So after you've made that update, and it should look like it does on the screen right now, I'll make this a little bigger so it's a little easier to see.
You don't have a stick and override button, I guess?
No, you just type it in and it's done. Yeah, it'll apply it automatically. So after that's done, let's click to run the optimization again, just in case that change affected the results. And we'll give it a second. So now it is going to include the cost of panels in the optimal solutions. Any predictions on what might change in these solutions based on just changing the target from net zero ready to net zero?
Cost more.
It will definitely cost more. I think that's true. Yeah,
You might have less viewers.
that's a good prediction, I think. Yeah. So after your solution is generated, let's just have a quick look at these two options. We'll actually save both of them as well, just so we can look at them side by side. So filter your solution by capital cost once it's determined. We'll change the name. In this case, let's just call it net zero, NZ. Save that solution, and then go back, change your capital costs to net cost, and save the solution again. And you may notice something between those two. What do you guys notice between the two packages this time?
Takes forever to save.
They're very similar.
They're the same, in fact. Yeah. Yeah. So they're exactly the same. So,
R40.
yeah, surprising, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So remember that we had 20,000 as our limit for PV generation. And you'll notice that this time, unlike the previous run, so I'm just going to scroll over one so we're comparing the previous one that used almost all 20,000 kilowatt hours of generation that was available. When we suddenly have to pay for that generation, that number came down to just under 13,000 kilowatt hours of generation. So it's more cost effective in this case to look at some better walls, some slightly better windows it looks like, and a more efficient heating source specifically to help bring down the number of panels that we have to pay for. So you can see this solution favored electric tanks and cold climate air source heat pumps for both solutions, the cost to owner and the cost to build. We,
Put in domestic hot water rental.
you can't yet, but it's coming. If you want to mimic that, yeah, you can actually go into the first page and set your base costs for gas to include the rental costs of the unit. And then you can go into your ECM tab and override the cost of a tank to zero.
Right.
That will
Except that
approximate it. It won't do for electric.
It won't evaluate the difference in rental rate between a 0.6 to 7 efficiency and a 0.9.
Correct. But that is, we've heard that comment on every workshop, and Luke's is working on that functionality so that we can do that too. Yeah. Yes.
Is the
No.
That changes the reference building when you're comparing, doesn't it?
In this case, it's comparing it to the base case as defined, so it's comparing electric solutions to a gas base case. And that is a limitation we've recognized. The ability to change the base case is something that I think will be useful, especially because, as you mentioned, the base case changes depending on your efficiency and your fuel type, depending on the code that you're looking at. So right now, all of these are based only on the base case as defined in this table.
Well, most builders are gonna wanna have their base case
Yes.
be what they're doing today
Yeah.
rather than
Right.
some arbitrary.
Right. Yeah, depending on whether you're trying to look at a percentage improvement on your own spec or a percentage improvement over a code reference house for compliance or something like that. So. Okay, so here we see, obviously, just to look down a little bit farther, that the net zero solution, if we're comparing it to the net zero ready solution, the net zero ready solution had a cost to the builder in its most efficient configuration of only $4,000 to achieve, and that price has gone up to $45,000. So the cost of panels has obviously a huge impact. We're talking about a pretty big array, 13,000 kilowatt hours. And the cost to owner has also gone up in this case for both solutions to $1,276 over the lowest cost to them in the previous run was $506 annually. And that again will account for the additional capital cost of buying a home with a solar array this large. They're still not saving enough money. You'll see that if I'm looking at the screen right now, I've got up here the net zero ready cost to own was realizing $650 in utility savings a year. That's gone up to $2,000 a year in utility savings thanks to the net metering, which is great. But the incremental annual mortgage cost has gone from $1,100 and change to $3,300 and change. So it's not a balanced equation yet, in part because of what we pay for PV and what we pay for electricity in this case. So two things obviously that would be interesting to play with: cost of PV, see how that's going to change, and the cost of electricity, which we know are kind of going in opposite directions, right? So let's look at what would happen if we go to the next step, number 4, which is where we actually restrict the amount of PV generation that's available to this to see what happens to the choices then. So let's go back to our optimization criteria tab. And where we see max PV generation capacity at 20,000, let's change that number to 10,000, which is lower than what we just saw it choose in the latest run. Let's go back to our ECM selection after we've made that change and click to run the optimization again. I should point out that the speed of this tool is something that has been dramatically improved, even though I know we're used to spreadsheets kicking things out pretty quick. That used to be about a 10 or 12 minute process to click optimization. It's down to about 30 seconds, which is pretty good. Okay, so I've got my results up on the screen. I'm just going to do a little test here. We'll switch net cost to buyer and capital cost and see if there's a difference between the two packages. They look the same again in this case. So let's choose either one, and we'll save it with a name as it shows on the sheet here of net zero dash 10,000 PV. Save that solution and we'll go and compare it to the previous one, which was the net zero with a greater amount of array. So what do you guys notice? What's changed? Sorry? Yeah, so it's now it's limiting it to the 10,000 that we typed in. So our PV array is now 9,861. And what's changed in our spec? How's it making up for that reduced consumption, or how's it achieving that reduced consumption? Yep, good. Heat pump hot water tank.
Increase our values.
Increased R values. We've got better R value in the attic and the walls and the below grade. So pretty big changes to knock those 3,000 kilowatt hours off and meet that target with that. So we can see the incremental cost to the builder has gone up over the last solution because these efficiency upgrades to the walls and the more expensive hot water tank result in an increased capital cost. The PV was cheaper for that 3,000 kilowatt hours than the savings.
Is there a way that you could say, let's say you're getting an incentive to minimize your error changes to like 1,
Yep.
0.5.
Yep.
So you wanted to fix that as an ECM measure that it doesn't actually do the analysis, but it just says, no, let's move 1.0.
Yep.
Fix one of those ECM measures?
Basically, by saying no to everything else, you are forcing the one that you say yes to.
Okay.
So you can do that, yes. And we're gonna, the last exercise today, we're gonna actually work with some incentive money and look at how you can apply something like that and have that considered in the cost.
Yeah, the air tightness is kind of so does it take into account CHVA's requirement that if you're doing net zero, you have to have a 1.5?
Yes, I think it does. Is that correct to say? If you choose the CHBA's net zero program as your target, does it recognize that 1.5 is required for program compliance?
No, not yet.
Okay,
No,
not yet.
neither.
Okay. Okay. So there we have it. So any questions so far on these changes we've made? Is this all making sense? You kind of see how you can do a few runs and get some data out of this? Good? Okay, so let's clear all our saved results so it makes some room for the next. So if you go down to the bottom of that table, there's a clear all saved solutions button. Just click that to erase everything we've done up till now. And we're going to go back and change some ECMs and go through a few more scenarios. So the first thing we're going to try is we're going to try to get to net zero without giving it the option to use a heat pump as the heating source. So in our ECM table, let's scroll down to the HVAC systems. And let's say no to the cold climate air source heat pump and to the air source heat pump. Now, without changing anything else, let's just click run and we'll see what happens if it spits out a solution for us. Has anybody here been involved with a net zero build yet?
Yes.
Yeah? Did it use a heat pump?
Yes.
We're seeing it pretty commonly, I think, yeah.
4 inches of foam,
Sorry?
4 inches of foam on the exterior wall,
In Ottawa?
metric homes, model home, Canada.
No solution.
So who saw this? No solution available. Please select higher performing ECM. So what is this telling us? It likes heat pumps, saying that. It's also saying that, it's not saying that net zero is not possible without a heat pump. In this case, we've also said no to 2 other air tightness levels, right? And we've also restricted our PV generation. So let's try adjusting the PV generation first to see if we can find a number that will allow us to generate a solution. So going back to the optimization criteria tab, we can change our PV generation capacity. Let's try 15,000. And then we'll click optimize again on our ECM tab. So if you have that solution run, just raise your hand so I know when we're all kind of getting there. Yeah. You guys have a solution? Yes. Okay. Nick and Jillian, you guys have a solution? You guys were able to get one run? Okay. So what do we notice? If we're looking at this solution, let's just save this one quickly. I'm gonna give this one a name as on the form or as on our exercise sheet in front of us. No heat pump. And I'm going to call this 15,000 PV because that's what we put in. And if we look at this now, we see it did generate a solution, obviously. It nearly maxed out the 15,000 PV, so we were right around that threshold. I gave you guys a bit of a cheat. I was supposed to make you try again until you got that 15,000, but in the interest of time, we'll start right there. So it did in this case go to an electric baseboard heating solution, since heat pump wasn't an option. Any guesses as to why it would prefer a an electric baseboard heater over a high efficiency gas furnace? You'll notice it's the same for capital cost and cost to owner in this case, so it's not based on utility costs. Sorry? Cheaper, yeah. Cheaper to install, so the capital cost is lower. That's better for the mortgage. It's also more efficient, right? If we're looking at pure energy and heat pump's not an option, electric baseboard resistance heaters are 100% efficient. The best gas furnaces out there are less than 100%. They're very close, but technically, so it may prefer it for that reason.
Now, in the costs for electric baseboard versus the natural gas furnace, the natural gas furnace also has an AC.
Mm-hmm.
Is there going to add AC to the electric baseboard, or are we just assuming there's?
It's assuming not in this case. Yeah, so it's not necessarily an apples to apples comparison in that case. There is a gas furnace option without AC, I believe. Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily default to it. Okay.
Is there a way, then to clarify, is there a way to confirm whether or not there's cooling in your house? Because otherwise,
That's a good point.
It's always
Right.
going to go electric baseboard.
Right, to set that as a requirement. I don't think we've got that ability at the moment.
No, but that's.
It's a very good comment.
Yeah, we could definitely work that into it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the next step. Let's look at the impacts of allowing for tighter houses, for improved air tightness. So let's go back to our ECM selection. We'll go to our ECM table and scroll down to the air tightness section. And without changing the heat pumps that we've still set to no, we'll change the air tightnesses all to yes. So we'll allow 1 air change per hour, and we'll allow 0.6. And once you've got those set up, you can go back and click Optimize again, and we'll see what happens this time. We've noticed sometimes differences based on operating system too. Yeah. I've got a Mac, and I found that it ran faster in Parallels on Mac than in Mac Excel. Yeah, for some reason. Okay, so after you've generated a solution, let's save that solution by adding airtight to the name as on the form, and then we'll compare the two solutions. I noticed on mine, again, there's no difference between the packages for capital and cost to owner in this case, so I'll save one of those solutions. And this is what I've got up on the screen. So you can see with the restriction on the heating system still applied, in this case it determined that it was cheaper to go for 0.6 air changes per hour than to pay for the heat pump, hot water tank, and better HRV. So we've gone kind of backwards on a couple of mechanical devices in favor of air tightness. How many builders know what they're paying for air tightness? If it's one of those kind of nebulous things that's affected in some part by so many different trades that it's often not broken out into its own, this is what I'm paying for air tightness, full stop. It's a difficult number to pin down. So fair to observe in this case that this is a number that's open to interpretation. Like this could be $10,000 for one builder and 0 for another. If they say, yeah, I can do 0.6 with certainty, I'll put 0 as my override cost for air tightness and have the software prefer that, as opposed to someone who's never done it before, wants to make sure that they're getting there, so they're going to pay for aero barrier, they're going to pay for better tapes, whatever it is, and their cost could be $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. Certainly subject to change. I think this category, above all the other ones, highlights that variability as being something.
The AeroSeal product does cap that number, because no matter what, you can bring them in and for a few grand,
Right.
they'll do your house and we can get down to 0.6 no matter what.
Yeah.
It's just, I think there is a cap. Like, I don't think you're going to be up around $10,000.
Yeah.
Certainly 5,000 is the cap, and maybe it's as low as 0 or even less.
Yeah. I do know there was one builder in BC, custom home builder, was building, $2.5, $3 million homes, so maybe not that relatable for most people. But he decided to track what he was paying for air tightness specifically by having every trade on his site record their hours where they did something related to foaming a hole or taping a board or anything related to that, and found out that he was paying $18,000 a house for air tightness. And he had no idea until he tracked it. So it's certainly a category that merits some scrutiny and some direct attention with the builders that you're working with, or that as a builder you're working with your EA to talk about this category and say, what's the difference between the cost of 1.5 ACH and 0.6? Because even within that gradient, we see a lot of movement. Some builders can hit 1.5 in their sleep, but struggle to get to 0.6 because it's a curve like this, right? It gets that much more difficult as you go up that hill. So yeah, interesting to see how these results. So in this case, because the cost was reasonably low to get to 0.6, that was the solution that was chosen in the absence of having heat pump technology available for this run. So let's add heat pumps back in and see what happens this time. So let's go back to our ECM selection, and we'll say yes to our heat pumps again.
Just the regular or both?
To both. You can say yes to both. And we'll run that again. Okay. Once you have a solution that's run, let's give it a name. This time, what are we naming this one? With heat pump instead of no heat pump, makes sense. We'll save that solution so we can compare the two side by side.
I just noticed there's nothing here for ground source.
Correct. Not because we have anything against the technology, just not all options are available yet. But it could definitely be included at some point.
Because the air source efficiencies, like when we were dealing with cold temperatures,
Mhm.
become very inefficient.
Mhm.
When you get minus 15. I mean, I put one in when I built my first house in '87. And I thought, oh, this is great technology. And then as I spoke to mechanical guys, they said, oh my God, no, it's very inefficient.
Yeah, there's been improvements there with cold climate air source heat pumps going down to lower temperatures, but there's still usually a point at which, whether financial sense or whether for energy efficiency, that switching to the backup heat source makes sense. Whether that backup is gas or electric is still very flexible. A lot of builders these days are opting for hybrid solutions where they have an electric heat pump with a gas backup, so that when you get to -10, -15, the homeowner can decide, or even they can be programmed into the thermostat so you don't have to rely on homeowners knowing the difference. But you can set those up to be the most energy efficient cutoff point or the most cost effective cutoff point based on what you're paying for your gas and when you need it, and what you're paying for electricity when you need it. So it is moving, but yeah.
Yeah, so when it says like they have a gas, press hot water, and they just run the hot water to provide that back up for your
Air handler.
air handling, yeah, for your air. Yeah, it's a good solution for if you're gonna have gas.
So homeowners,
Okay, so
Yeah, well, yeah, you need a control system. That's the most important part of that.
yeah.
They're becoming built in as well.
Yeah. So with this option put back in now, what do we see is changed? if we're looking at the no heat pump solution with air tightness versus with heat pump, it's kept 0.6 in this case. But we see that with the availability of a cold climate air source heat pump, it's preferring lower envelope values with a more efficient mechanical system in order to keep costs down in this case. Now, this I think highlights something that this group already started to discuss before the break. This is today costs that are put into the software. This is not future investment value. This is not when electricity goes up by 10 cents a kilowatt hour. This is based on the parameters we put in today. And if that's the condition that you're evaluating, this is useful. If you would like to evaluate 10 years down the road, then we have to go back and change some of the default assumptions to make that possible. So interesting to note that it, in this case, is saying, okay, the cost of a cold climate air source heat pump and the complexity is low enough that it's a more economical solution for the same energy efficiency as the higher insulation values as well. You'll also notice that it actually used less PV in this case because the impact of that cold climate heat pump was enough to reduce the PV usage in this case. For anyone who's done a heat pump in a project, any comments on complexities, costs, availability?
The comfort of them, because the air temperature coming out of the grills, there's the lower temperature than gas or
Okay.
oil. So they tend to turn up the thermostat higher to compensate for the lower temperature of heat.
Interesting. Okay.
There's a few things with them. Like they're slower to respond when you have a setback.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the cold climate ones come from the United States, so they're very subject to trade issues and Canadian dollar issues, more so than stuff that's more common because you're not getting the same deals with like your mechanical contractors.
Right.
Those are kind of the two biggest issues with them.
Right.
But
Cool.
they're a very effective solution.
Right.
I think as well too, the one big thing to note about air source heat pumps is the efficiency can vary dramatically, right? You can have an air source heat pump that's 200% efficient up to like 450% efficient.
Yeah.
So and then also as the temperature drops, generally the capacity drops as well too, as well as the efficiency. So it's important to try and look at your performance curves when you're looking at these air source heat pumps. Especially if you're looking at a primarily electric solution and not a hybrid solution, because as that temperature drops, you want to make sure that your air source heat pump is doing as much heavy lifting as possible, from a cost standpoint.
Something I've also seen happen on sites is that as the construction progresses, one of the pieces of equipment that affects the efficiency of the heat pump gets switched out, most often the coil. So sometimes the spec'd heat pump is the same outside of the house, the coil gets switched and the COP changes. And the impact on the energy model is not necessarily understood when that change is made. It's an economic decision or an availability decision, et cetera. So certainly complexities, because it's one of those interrelated pieces of equipment that relies on the heat pump unit itself, the fan and the coil, all working together to achieve that COP. So
Yeah, that's really difficult to check
yes.
as well.
Yeah, and it's difficult even at the stage where we're trying to help builders get pricing from their HVAC contractors, because you say, okay, well, this Mitsubishi has the COP you're looking for, but they may quote it with the coil they prefer, and that results in a different COP, and it may not be well communicated. So even in the assessment phase, it's difficult to manage. So we're all learning in the industry, I think, that more questions need to be asked and made clear at the outset of projects that are using that sort of technology.
They're just about the thermal comfort portion of it. Some of the new heat pumps that are coming out now, like the 21 SEER, the variable frequency drives, so they do resolve a lot of those issues on, one-stage or two-stage heat pumps. They do cost a lot more, obviously, but paired now with an ECM drive, air handler, you can really see some amazing efficiencies, and they actually do provide a good amount of heat now too. So there's big advancements, but again, the cost is slightly prohibitive still right now. It's coming down.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I guess, because your air source heat pump is going to provide you with heating as well as cooling, it can be a difficult balance adjusting your sizing for your heating requirements and then adjusting your sizing for your cooling requirements. And if it's variable, then that's great. But if it's not variable, then you can definitely experience some comfort issues because it's like it's oversized for heating or it's oversized for cooling, and so you're going to have short
Yeah.
cycling on your flow and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, and on that subject of cooling, I mean, something we haven't highlighted yet, but that I feel we should bring to everyone's attention. Has anyone noticed how frequently high gain windows have been selected in these optimal solutions? Pretty commonly, right? Energy efficiency modeling software loves high solar gain because it's free energy. And we're just talking about energy in this case, but that's worth highlighting. And when you're going through these ECMs, you know, in practice for your own projects with the help of your energy advisor, it's worth having the discussion. Is this project going to suffer from overheating if I use high gain glass? What's my exposure? What's my shading solution, etc.? Do I need to look at mid gain or low gain options only and restrict the ECMs with that caveat? So
What are the assumptions for exposure?
it's based on the archetype. So the archetype in this case was run, I think, with a specific exposure, right? So it's a fixed orientation, and if you were doing an evaluation of your own archetype, you could specify whether you do the run with a fixed orientation, or you could do every orientation and have those as 4 archetypes that you generate different solutions for. But you'd have to redo the baseline modeling in HTAP to have that available. So it's not redistributing windows. It's not assuming shading. It's assuming the same assumptions that HOD 2000 would have based on what you model on the archetype as overhang. So if we look back at the archetype page for a sec, just see the picture of the house. This one would include the overhang of the eaves in the model, but that's it for shading. It would have direction based on what was modeled. So I don't know.
The front face is south, and most of the windows are going to be north facing. So in this case, overheat is not going to be such a huge issue. But let's say we turned it around, whereas all the glazing is on the other side.
Yeah.
Not going to be very many overhangs as well too, because this is a walkout. Yeah, you're probably going to experience a lot more overheating if you took the same house, switched it around, but you'd also see more energy savings.
But you'd also see more energy savings. So that's really, I mean, that's another flag, right? And that's, I mean, that not to sell what we do, but that's why energy advisors being involved in this process is kind of critical, because these are the things that we can help you identify as risks and talk through as part of the building process. Anyways, plowing ahead, we have a couple more steps, and then we're going to let you loose on an activity, and then we'll wrap up for the day. So let's go to step number 8. We're going to go back to our optimization criteria. We're going to put our PV back up to 20,000 kilowatt hours and see if that changes the assumptions that the software makes. So let's click to run that. So this time, just to recap, we're including heat pumps as an option, we're including all of our air tightness levels as options, and we've increased our PV back up to 20,000 kilowatt hours per year. Any predictions? Who thinks it's going to add more PV and reduce some of the other options? Nobody? Who thinks it's going to keep the PV the same? Think this won't affect anything? So people are happy with the PV levels? All right, here we go. So we're going to save this one as 20,000 PV. Oops. I don't want to cut that button. There we go. Okay, good guess. It didn't add any PV in this case. It seems to be happy with 13,000. That's kind of the optimal amount of PV. It's kept all the other solutions the same. So leaving that at 20,000 now, this time let's change the cost of PV instead of the amount. So let's go back to our optimization criteria tab. And let's change the cost from 2.1 to 1.3. We'll go back to ECM and run that solution. What do you guys think this time?
More PV.
More PV across the board? Okay, here it is. We have a name for this one. We'll save this one as 20,000 PV cheap. Name's getting long. We'll save that. And sure enough, if we're looking at that compared to previous run, it has basically maxed out the PV, gone over 19,000, and it's actually gone backwards now on the HVAC. So backwards, I shouldn't say backwards. It's preferred a cheaper capital cost option, electric baseboard. So paying for the energy generation rather than reducing the energy consumption on site in this case.
Your R value is like substantially, which is sort of surprising.
There must be a substantial trade-off in cost between the cold climate air source heat pump and the baseboards, and it's made a couple incremental changes above to get you under 20,000, spent the rest on PV, and said, yeah, because I mean that insulation upgrade in the attic is a pretty inexpensive one. It's dialed back the air tightness now a little bit, so a little bit less expensive than the 0.6. But yeah, it has increased the wall R value, still those high gain windows. And it's got an insulated slab for the first time, which is kind of interesting. Okay, any questions about using the tool right now, specific to what we've kind of gone through in these exercises? Yes?
How would you import sort of like your own archetype?
At the moment, you would hire an energy advisor who's been trained in HTAP to generate that for you. Basically, what it involves is building a HOT 2000 model of the new archetype and then putting it through HTAP to generate all of the data. And we're kind of actively working, we're in the fledgling stages of developing a network of EAs that are qualified to do that work because it's going to be in demand, I think, pretty quickly. Hard to say yet what the cost of that will be. It's not much more complicated in terms of effort than building a HOT 2000 model, but then the compute time and however that gets paid for, whether it's cloud computing or not, I couldn't say yet, couldn't say. Yes?
Are you two qualified to do that?
Sorry?
Are you two qualified to do
Just about. I've had some preliminary HTAP training, but I think I need a little bit more.
Excuse me.
Yes?
My question was going to be, I'm not an energy advisor, as you know,
Mhm.
but as one,
Mm-hmm.
would your likely approach with multiple clients be to save a version of this tool for each client? with
Yes.
their costing data set up already?
Exactly, yeah. So I think that the way we see it working, one way we see it working, and this may change when we get out in the field, but if I was working with you as a builder, let's say, then I could pre-select some ECMs for us to discuss, generate a couple of runs, come in, we sit down together, and then I can show you the tool, leave it with you to play with the costs, or we do that part together, and then it becomes your spreadsheet as a builder, and then you can kind of own that so that it's not sharing your costs out there with other builders if it's not of interest for you to do that. So yeah, it would certainly be developed specifically for each builder as a tool. Whether it lives with the energy advisor or the builder depends, I think, on the relationship still. It could change. I could see that being different builder to builder with that. Yes?
My question is kind of an extension of Nick's. So right now it's the four, I guess, archetypes almost. So it's like mostly semi or detached homes with one exception. Could this be applied to residential high-rise in the future or even like retrofit?
Theoretically, yes. It's all dependent on the costing data that we can run in the background. Right now, you can't model a high-rise building in HOT 2000, but you can do a MERB unit in HOT 2000. Depending on, you have to make sure at first that the application in HOT 2000 is correct, right? It's not going to work if you're trying to model a commercial building in HOT 2000, as your underlying assumptions will all be wrong. But if the housing type that you are thinking of can be accurately represented in HOT 2000, then it can be run through HTAP, and this costing tool could be used to filter the solutions, absolutely. Yeah.
There is this same type of application in the commercial world as well.
Okay.
For high-rise residential and commercial office buildings.
Who does that?
Morse Merfield, Stantec,
Okay.
some of the bigger consultants.
So it's like the consultant's proprietary stuff.
It's something similar. They'll use like an Energy Plus modeling tool rather than HOT 2000, and then they've done the same thing code using this other tool, and I can't remember the name of it,
VTAP?
and it runs through, I don't think it's the same.
There is a VTAP.
Oh, BTAP, you said.
Buildings, yeah.
And it'll do the same thing. It'll provide millions of iterations on insulation and HVAC systems.
Commercial guys always get all the cool stuff first. Okay, so that's it for kind of our together activities. Now I've got an exercise for everybody to try in their pairs, if you will. So if you want to pair up with the person next to you to do this. The exercise this time, if you see down at the bottom, the challenge, we're going to try and find the lowest cost to own. And there are certain parameters you have to follow. So we're going to set the target on the optimization criteria to net zero ready. So we can all go ahead and do that right away. And we're going to leave the PV at 20,000 a year capacity. Now remember, because we're doing net zero ready, it's not going to include the cost of that PV. Just set that as the limit for our consumption in the solution we're going to generate. But now what I would like each of you to try is on the ECM page, you're allowed to choose only 2 from each category. 2 ECMs from each category, so 2 yeses, the rest should be nos. For every category with the exception of the very last one, the Energy Star appliances, those should all stay yes. So we'll leave the last one as yeses. But make 2 selections from each of the other ones. Do a run, save your results, and then see if you can tweak that by changing your selections to get an even lower cost to own. And as you do that, once you've finished, let's say, 3 or 4 optimizations, I'd like you to take your lowest cost to own, and fill out the numbers for your group on one of the lines on the chart up here. So after you've generated 3 or 4 iterations, you feel good that you've generated a very good low cost of ownership, then you can write the total cost number, which on the spreadsheet you will see, just so we're all writing down the same numbers. Total cost is the first line from the finances table. And then you're also going to write the incremental net cost, which is the last line. So those are the 2 numbers that you're going to record on the paper on the board after you've done 2 or 3 runs and you've optimized for the lowest cost to own using 2 ECMs from the table.
We're trying to minimize that last increment.
Exactly. Yeah, you're trying. Correct. Yeah, you're trying to minimize that number to the homeowner, the net incremental cost. Everyone understand? Okay, so we're going to have about 15 minutes to do this. I'm going to kind of run out and get a drink of water, and I'll come back and wander around and see if anyone needs some help or some guidance with that. So remember, 2 ECMs should be yes, the rest should be no from each category. Lucas, are we allowing them to play with costs for this exercise, or should we leave those fixed? Yeah, so for the purposes of this exercise, if you want to play with overriding some of the costs of your ECMs, you can do that as well. You may just have to justify your assumptions after the fact.
So we're starting from the base case that has been set up with all this, so we're
Yes.
overriding the SIP to 20,000.
So as long as you've got these numbers set, net zero ready and 20,000, then you can start from scratch on your ECM table. Make whatever selections you want. You said it was the effective R16 above grade wall? Is that what I heard? Yes. Okay. Okay, and did you guys apply the discount? And how did you allocate your discount?
We allocated it all towards the wall R value above it.
Okay, so an incentive was applied here. Interesting. Out of curiosity, how many, did anyone else use the incentive money? Just out of curiosity, while we get the next results, can you guys rerun that option without that applied? And we'll see how that affects them. That's interesting. Okay, and let's go to the highest number. Who was this? Was this?
Number 5 is the highest.
Interesting. We have highest total cost, but we also have a difference in which one's the highest incremental cost. So let's get both, just to see what the difference is. So let's start with you guys. So with the highest incremental cost, what was your insulation or your ACH?
1.
Your above grade wall?
It was R26.
And your HVAC system.
CCASX1.
And what was your team's approach in choosing your ECMs?
I looked at the results that we'd got previously and made sure I kept the options that had been selected as cost efficient there
Mm-hmm.
to begin with.
Mhm.
And then when we came up with the first set of results, we changed to try and see what we could make a bit better. But the one thing that we did keep was we tried to put in low gain windows
Okay.
because we don't like
Yeah.
high gain windows.
Yeah.
And what was it that you were particularly caring about? There was an aversion to
There's a lot of it.
gas. I think there was
Yep.
some aversion to gas.
Yeah.
It seems to be skewed towards high gain windows.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's
Yeah. Yeah. Can be. I share your concern on that front. We've talked about adding flags for that, but it's definitely one that it really highlights the fact that this tool cares about energy almost in a siloed way, separate from comfort and other issues.
It's a lot
So,
of tree planting.
right, yeah, exactly. Okay, and for the other one, the highest total cost, but second highest incremental cost, that was you guys. What was your ACH?
I can start with our approach first. Actually.
Sure. Yeah, please do. Please do.
We went with a conserve first approach, so we chose basically the highest insulation for walls, windows, low grade,
Mm-hmm.
thinking that we want to conserve energy first, and then we started playing around with our mechanical systems basically.
Okay.
And because of that, we ended up getting natural gas.
Okay.
Because it was the cheapest operating, and then we tried to figure out what we could do to not get natural gas, and we were actually having a really hard time.
Interesting.
So our ACH was 1.0, R60 on the ceiling, R40 on the walls. Window type was high gain, which we again tried to avoid, which was difficult. Low grade was R28, slab R10, HRE 60%, domestic hot water, natural gas condensing tankless. The HVAC system was at 96% natural gas for us.
Okay.
I was running gas only, he was running electric only, and we couldn't seem to get away from it without some sort of incentive. Not trying to prove a point. I am employed by a gas company, but
Yeah.
my role is actually to try and find a different solution, so
Interesting.
just a caveat there.
Okay. And did you guys get a new solution or any change?
Solution, just different cost.
Can you give us the different costs? Just
68,111.
68,111.
Cost is 893.
Well, apples to apples, not quite the lowest, still in the ballpark. So we had two solutions that were, again, we had a little bit of an inversion, cheaper to build, cheaper to operate in this case. So, and interesting that everyone got quite a variety of results. So it does show that, if you use this tool with too much of a filter applied at the outset, it may limit the number of options that you get to evaluate on merit after the fact. If you only pick your favorites out of this list and just decide that's what you're always going to do, it may not it doesn't give the tool a chance to surprise you with something you might not have otherwise considered. On the flip side, if you always say yes to everything, and it always gives you high gain windows, or it always gives you cold climate air source heat pumps, and those are problematic options for you, then you have to curb the results in a different way. So, yes.
Which of those solutions was solution 3, the lowest incremental net cost?
We didn't actually look at this one. Let's do that now, I guess, because without the incentive, this was actually the lowest. I think this was you guys.
Yeah.
So what was your solution there? Just the ACH, the above grade wall value, and the HVAC system, if you have them.
So at 1 ACH, R22 above grade wall, and 96% natural gas.
Okay, so the two lowest solutions without incentives favored a gas furnace for cost to operate.
I have one that's actually
Oh,
has 698, because we're running them simultaneously.
all right.
So I have one at 698 incremental, and $72,114 for the total cost. And it has full-time air source heat pump, R22 wall, and 1.5 AC.
Interesting.
What was the cost of that?
Total cost was $72,114.
70,214.
Yeah.
70214. Sorry. 70214. Interesting. So looser on the air tightness. Interesting. There's obviously a lot to dive into in every one of those packages.
I've built a few net zero homes, and this is almost
Confirmation then, maybe that's a good thing. That's the real reason we built the tools, make everyone feel better about what they're already doing. No, just kidding. So anyways, I hope that's interesting, if not enlightening in some way for you. Just generally speaking, was anyone surprised by any of the solutions that they saw today that the tool offered? Maybe, a situation where, oh, I didn't expect it to tell me that. Anybody have anything that really jumped out?
Higher air tightness. I thought they would all be tools.
Right. Okay. Yeah. How much do you think that's related to what we've put in as costs for air tightness in this table? Potentially. I mean, we're certainly, when we're talking about 1 to 0.6 and down, we're into diminishing returns on air tightness, same way we would be on insulation at a certain point. But yeah, interesting. Yeah.
I'd be interested to see how the factors of air tightness are in colder climates.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. Other locations is certainly something we've already seen this tool perform very differently. A lot of the markets, I think it was out east, where there was a lot of dependence on oil, and switching to heat pump technologies resulted in crazy good values to the buyers, like massive savings annually in a way that we couldn't show in Ontario. So it's certainly location sensitive. Yeah.
I'd be quite interested to see how the results would change if it could help with the cooling criteria that's going to potentially be put in the building code.
Okay.
Because if you could factor that in here,
Mhm.
that would tell you that probably you want low gain windows rather than high gain, and you could
Right.
end up different
Right.
costs.
Right. So kind of some way of, how do you say, not just taking energy in isolation, but energy with certain other parameters applied against it seasonally. And that's something else that we've talked about. Seasonal and hourly simulation data is available through HTAP for this sort of thing, so we can apply it that way. So another hand
I think
over
what
here.
jumped out to me the most is how close all this stuff was. Even when you were looking at an R16 wall versus an R40 wall. Like, they're kind of polar opposites from a construction perspective.
Right.
But are really not coming in all that differently, which is sort of crazy.
That might change quite a lot depending on what costing you put in.
Yeah, and like,
Sure.
granted, there's all sorts of limitations in it being an early version, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and as you pointed out earlier with the question about wall thickness and which way it's adding insulation, if you really play that one out, you suddenly have R40 walls, you have to increase your lot size to accommodate, you have 4 less lots in your subdivision. How does that impact your whole equation of the builder? So, yeah.
I was just going to go back to the comment you made about builders having sort of a set, distribution system and processes in place, and how that could drastically affect some of the costs in here as well.
Sure.
So I know that it's impossible to pick a single cost for anything, but I think that's a big factor in sort of determining some of these inputs. Like we're noticing that I think the cold climate air source heat pump was, how much was it, like $13,000? $15,500. So, I think there was an ductless mini split on here, but maybe that's a different option that can provide a really good solution.
Right.
Or other things. I think it's a really good lesson to kind of go through this. Obviously, garbage in, garbage out.
For sure. Another interesting point along those same lines, we've had situations through my company where we've done some preliminary energy modeling and made an assumption on the efficiency of a heat pump and found out that the supplier network just doesn't have that piece of equipment available. And so even though it is available out there as an efficiency for heat pumps, builder X doesn't deal with distributor Y who supplies that equipment, and therefore it's just not available for the project. So yeah, interesting. Yes?
I have a couple of points that are related. I'd be curious to know how sensitive the results are of this cost optimization to the actual model that you use. So have you ever tried changing the actual building slightly and running it again to see how different the outputs would be? Because otherwise, if the results change significantly, if you make that slight change, this
Right.
isn't terribly useful. If it doesn't change at all, really, then great.
What do you mean by slight change?
So, say you added a bay window or something, or
Deeper overhangs.
deeper overhangs, or you increase the floor area slightly, because that's the kind of differences that you might get between this archetype and other people's houses. If that kind of difference is radically changing what the cost optimal solution is, then this isn't actually helping that much. Whereas if it's making a very small change, then yeah, it's great.
That's a really interesting point, I think. Is everyone following the question a little bit there? But yeah, if it's, because that goes back to one of the preliminary statement or claims that I was saying, is that this tool is still useful in providing a direction if your house is similar to what we're looking at today. But the question of how similar does it have to be for this to be useful, I think that's a good question. That's a good question.
My follow-up point was going to be, if you were using this to try and come up with a spec that would get you to net zero, you come up with this, you then plug it into your actual building, and it probably won't actually quite meet net zero.
Right.
Because you'll be comparing it to the actual baseline in the code rather than a gas-based house, for instance. And the geometry will be slightly different. So then how do you work out from there what you should actually be doing? And maybe that won't actually be cost-effective anymore if you make
Possibly.
slight changes to meet it.
Right, right. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't think we've experimented with that yet. I mean, I think the process that I've envisioned is that you come up with a spec, your energy advisor builds that into your model to see how close you are. Hopefully you're in the ballpark and that you're talking about incremental change. But as you point out, if you put this into the HOT 2000 model for your actual design at 1 air change per hour, and then you realize, no, I need to be at 0.6 to actually get to net zero, have you suddenly adopted a whole bunch more costs that change this whole equation? It's a good question as well. So it does show that, you know, the tool and the follow-up have potentially different balances, I think. You can put more effort into developing an archetype of your own project to put into the tool and make it very specific, and spend the money and the time up front doing that so that it's considered in all of these runs. And then what it spits out is arguably closer to what your final spec needs to be. Or you spend less time in this, use this as like an afternoon charrette type exercise to point you in a direction, and then you spend more time refining from a limited scope of options that hopefully you're considering as a result of the tool.